until he won't be able to write about it.
Right, okay, yeah.
There's a lot of ideas actually.
Okay, so we'll just do it like one question each from the floor. One question each from the floor.
But there's only a couple of, so you can take more than that.
No, just do one.
Same idea. Yeah, sure.
Poacher and gamekeeper comes to
I'll
put my hat on and go and sit in another seat.
Which is great because instead of having to transfer it to the people, you just pop it that skin and download it. And you can shoot ProRes on that.
What height are you at?
Oh, you were right in, yeah. Yeah. It's clearing up, it's coming off the ball bit in the middle.
How?
John.
If you were right down, it was okay, but I'm at the sort of the base of the mic.
Alright, so you're quite low. Alright.
It's not just me, there's two others who have said wrong.
But I care about
He
you
said
more.
oh, thanks, Greg. Scott. Get mixed up.
Mahmoud said she's going to challenge us. Squeezing cat.
Probably wasn't it?
It's just to prove that you can.
No fat.
It's an interesting question. No.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Hope you're all well. It's been a busy week, as you can imagine, and I want to start by just saying what a contrast it was yesterday to see John Swinney running away from the media, running away from the opportunity to answer questions, and me being really upfront and open about talking about the challenges facing our great country, Scotland. And I think the choice that faces the people of Scotland in 3 months' time is now getting clearer and clearer by the day. And we have spent throughout this year so far setting out the differences and the dividing lines between ourselves and the SNP. And that choice between me and John Swinney on the 7th of May could not be clearer. Honesty with me, dishonesty with John Swinney. Talking about Scotland from me, and John Swinney addicted to talking about anywhere but Scotland. Setting out the alternative with me, or more managed decline with John Swinney. Transparency and truth from me, or the continued culture of cover-up and secrecy with John Swinney. Me always on the side of families, John Swinney on the side of protecting institutions. Me putting patient safety first, John Swinney putting politics first. Me following the law, John Swinney using public money to try and fight the law. And today we're setting out clear dividing lines on business and growth between ourselves and the SNP. As the independent forecasters have already described, we have now over a £1 billion growth gap in Scotland because of the decisions made by this SNP government. And we've also had recent publication of both the Hunter Foundation Manifesto for Scotland as well as the CBI Scotland Manifesto for Scotland that also sets out clear dividing lines between ourselves and the SNP. A broken rate system with the SNP, or a reformed rate system that supports our high streets with me. A skills system that fails too many young people with the SNP, or a reformed skills system that backs every young person in our country with me. A broken planning system with the SNP, or a reformed planning system that gets Scotland building again with me. Transport projects that are promised but never delivered with the SNP, or with me making sure we actually build the roads and the infrastructure this country so desperately needs. Record low house building with the SNP, or a house building revolution with me. Broken procurement system with the SNP, or us making sure that more Scottish businesses have access to the huge procurement opportunities in Scotland with me. And also with the SNP looking inward, trying to sell Scotland to the Scots, or with me looking outward, trying to sell Scotland to the rest of the world. And I should say, I'm choosing the nuclear option twice this week. A clear dividing line too also on the future of clean nuclear energy here in Scotland, with investment at Hunterston and in Torness, so we can secure the jobs of the future, we can secure our energy supply here in Scotland, and we can make sure we're supporting our industries here, rather than the playground politics of John Swinney and the SNP and their ideological block to clean nuclear energy going into the future. So that's the choice. More of the same, a third decade of destruction with the SNP, or a different kind of future for Scotland, a better future for Scotland with me. That is the straight choice that the people of Scotland face on the 7th of May, and it's a campaign we absolutely relish. I'll now open up for questions. I've got a list here, helpfully, so I'll take, because you're the first arrival, John, I'll take you first. John Bithman from the Times.
And as you've just described what you did earlier in the week as the nuclear option, do you feel stronger or weaker and more isolated at the end of that?
What I would say is honesty is strength, not weakness. And we have seen dishonesty from this SNP government time and time again. And I feel liberated and energised for the election campaign ahead, because for me, my first loyalty and my first priority is to my country, Scotland. That's what this election's about, and that's who we're going to win this election for. Craig from PA.
Hi, you said on Wednesday about Pam Duncan Glancy being suspended from the party. You said that was because new information came to light. Can you tell us when you found out and when Scottish Labour found out about this information? And also, why wasn't the fact that she was friends with a twice convicted paedophile enough for you to boot her out of the party?
So a couple of things, Craig. I think it's important, a really important question, but I think it's important to look at the process and also the approach that we took in Scotland. We became aware of the friendship. I sacked Pam Duncan-Glancy from the Shadow Cabinet. We asked direct questions of Pam. Those questions were not, answers to those questions were not good enough, so she was withdrawn as a candidate. And then new information came to light that sparked an independent investigation that's now being looked at, and on the basis of that independent investigation, she has had the whip withdrawn and no longer sits as a Scottish Labour MSP. That's a clear, different approach that we have taken, because I am very clear about the standards I expect, and I am very clear about the judgments I have to make, and that's why we made the decisions we did. I'll take Jacob.
When did you find out about this new information?
So that new information sparked the same day as the investigation, and the action was taken that day. I'll take Jacob from the Telegraph.
Hi, thanks. Following the High Court's ruling on Palestine action, on the ban on Palestine action being unlawful under terrorism legislation, do you count that ban as just another example, another mistake made by the Labour government?
Look, I think we have to look at this as the serious issue that it is, and one is there are judgment calls that have to be made and decisions that can only be made both by a Home Secretary but also by judges in a court. And I'm not going to interfere in the process of that decision making. But on the principal point here, one, the issue of Palestine is absolutely huge and important. And I find it completely unacceptable for anyone, regardless of the politics, regardless of background, to use that fundamentally important issue to distract from that issue and for their own ends. We have to see a maintenance of peace in Gaza. We have to see a genuine two-state solution. We have to see the end of war crimes. We have to see those that have committed war crimes brought to account. And I will always speak my mind on that. But for anyone to use the cause of Palestine to think it's acceptable to attack defence facilities, to deface many defence infrastructure, and to conduct what frankly are terrorist attacks is completely and utterly unacceptable. And I will continue to take a principled position on Gaza and the Middle East. I will continue to call out unlawful acts and terrorist acts, but ultimately these are judgment calls for a Home Secretary and for a judge to take around prescription and otherwise.
So the government are right to appeal?
That's a decision for the Home Secretary and the judge. I'm very clear the issue of Palestine really matters, and people trying to hijack that issue to talk about themselves rather than talking about the people suffering on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, I don't find that acceptable, and there is never any excuse for attacking defence infrastructure in our country. I'll take Alistair from the Scotsman.
Hi there. Have you spoken to Keir Starmer at all since you called him to quit on Monday?
Yes.
What was that conversation?
It was a perfectly fair and reasonable conversation about how we make sure that we are focused on the election on the 7th of May. He's determined that he wants to deliver for the people of Scotland. I made very clear that I want a UK Labour government demonstrating it's delivering for Scotland, and I made clear that the choice in the election campaign is going to be between me and John Swinney. I didn't step back from what I said. I stand by what I said and what I stated, but I'm looking to the future and the choice between me and John Swinney for this country. I'll let you have your third question, Alistair. That conversation was yesterday. I'll take Simeon from the Times.
Yeah, the FT.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Not a problem.
I'll blame Lewis.
You promised a house building revolution. Could you say how exactly you would achieve that? Would you scrap MPF4? Would you scrap the rent controls that are coming in? Would you look at a presumption in favour of development that might sort of trigger resistance in local communities?
All very good questions, Simeon, and I'm not going to pre-announce work that is happening, but what I will say is what we've already announced around how we look at the Scottish National Investment Bank, how we make sure we're using public funds in a more appropriate way, including pension funds, and also how we reform our planning system so we can get much faster decision making so we can spark house building. But we will be doing a separate press conference in more detail. I wish they were, Simeon, but frankly their record on homelessness and housing is nothing short of disgraceful and shameful. On their watch we have 10,000 children 10,500 children now homeless in our country. If they were doing the right things by housing, we would not be in that situation, and it's yet another example of why we have to boot an incompetent SNP government out of office. I'll take Abby from the National. Sorry, I'm going by who came by into the room, so I'll just do it in no preferred order at all. Abby from the National.
I'm happy I'm getting a question. So you removed the whip from Pam Duncan-Glancy on Tuesday over a relationship with Sean Morton. The same night, Matthew Doyle said that he wouldn't be taking the Labour whip in the Lords. Previously, you repeatedly defended allowing Pam Duncan-Glancy to keep the Labour whip. So did London order you to suspend it?
Abby, that script might have worked a week ago. It certainly definitely doesn't work now. So maybe rehash them for future weeks and future press conferences. But specifically on the issue of what you said, the difference is there is now an independent investigation with new information that came to light. And in light of that independent investigation, we chose to remove the whip from Pam Duncan-Glancy. But there's clearly a different approach. When I found out, I didn't appoint Pam Duncan-Glancy, I sacked Pam Duncan-Glancy. When I asked questions of Pam Duncan-Glancy and she was not able to give me appropriate answers, I withdrew her as a candidate. And the moment an independent investigation was sparked, she had the whip withdrawn.
So we're supposed to be that's a coincidence then that was the exact same night?
Well, the investigation was sparked the same day, and so she was suspended on the same day the investigation took place. I'll take Tom from the Daily Mail.
Yes, on business issues, many of the business organisations you've been quoting in today's press release are deeply opposed to the increases in employer national insurance contributions. Do you feel that was an error on the part of the UK government?
Well, look, I have already stated that the decision on the national insurance increase was, of course, a challenge, but you have to look at the choices that confronted the Chancellor in that budget. She had a black hole that had to be filled. She had to end decisively austerity, and she had to make sure that we were focusing on the investments that our UK Labour government wanted to make. And in that context, she chose to increase employers' national insurance. Now, of course, that poses a challenge on employers alongside, which I very support, the increase in the national living wage. But they are choices that a Chancellor had to make. But let's not talk about 2 budgets ago. Let's talk about what happens in the future. And in the future, in Scotland, on the 7th of May, we are not choosing a UK Labour government. We are not choosing who the Chancellor is. We're choosing who the First Minister is, who the Scottish Government is, and what different decisions we will make in Scotland to support Scotland's businesses. And this SNP government has a record of failing businesses, not understanding business, not understanding growth, and destroying too many parts of our communities. And that's why I am determined that we beat the SNP on the 7th of May and elect a new government here in Scotland and a new First Minister. And I'm absolutely clear that only I and Scottish Labour can do that.
You talked about being liberated and this new era of honesty. What does that make your previous incarnation? Are you dishonest yourself then?
I have been. So let's look at the individual decisions. I took a different position on Gaza. I took a different position on the winter fuel payment. I took a different position on WASPI. There are countless areas where we have taken different decisions here in Scotland. The point I'm making is in the next 3 months, John Swinney will want to talk about anybody else but anyone in Scotland and anything else apart from Scotland. I am saying quite clearly that I will make this election about one thing and one thing only, because my priority and my loyalty is to one place only, my country, Scotland. And Scotland's got a choice. It can either choose the dishonesty, the failure and the decline of John Swinney, or it can choose a different kind of government and a different kind of Scotland with me. And that is an election I absolutely relish over the course of the next 3 months. Paul from the Record.
2 questions. What is your reaction to the full details of the charges against Peter Monaghan that were revealed last night? And secondly, Labour are about 20 points behind the SNP in the polls. You're in the fight of your life. I'm aware that some of your MPs are talking about campaigning in that Gorton and Denton by-election in Manchester this month. Wouldn't it be better for them to be in Scotland campaigning for their local Labour candidate?
So let me just take the second point first. Is our Scottish Labour MPs who I expressed pride in my statement on Monday, who I emphasised those that are in government. I want to stay in government to defend and protect Scotland's interests is absolutely important. Our Scottish Labour MPs will be on the streets campaigning to deliver a new government here in Scotland and to elect a new First Minister here in Scotland. But as you'll know, there were many colleagues from across the UK Labour Party that came to campaign, for example, in the Rutherglen by-election, came to campaign, for example, in the Hamilton by-election, and I think it is perfectly reasonable that we have Labour figures from Scotland going to campaign in the Gorton by-election too, because I recognise that we have to defeat the poison of reform. And defeating the poison of reform and not allowing the politics of reform to stop us from making the progress we need to make here in Scotland on the 7th of May is really important to me. On the really serious question you ask about the Peter Morrell charge sheet, let me first say that I am not going to comment on a live police investigation. I think in the fullness of time there will be serious questions that need to be answered by all those people in leadership positions in the SNP. I include John Swinney in that. My understanding is John Swinney himself had involvement, if not the person that did appoint Peter Morrell as Chief Executive in the first place, so there are obviously questions there, but I'm not going to talk about the individual police case or indeed the criminal investigation. But let me make a broader point about the SNP's record in government and the SNP's misuse of public money and their own dishonesty, because I don't believe the SNP can be trusted with the public's money. Look at the cases they're taking, for example, challenging the Equality Act in the courts, wasting hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money to try and fight against a court ruling. Secondly, the painted all windows on ferries that are 10 times the price they should have been, or 5 times the price they should have been rather, which is a complete breach of public money. The prison that was supposed to cost £100 million now costing over £1 billion. The public money that's being spent so they don't have to publish the salmon files and the sturgeon files. This is a political party that has lost its way, that is dishonest, and is wasting public money and therefore needs to be booted out of office, and that will be a key dividing line come the election on the 7th of May. And the last name I've got on my list is Mark. Oh, sorry, Mark.
Can I ask about Douglas Alexander's role? Because he's going to be the campaign chief. He's going to campaign to get the man elected who says that the leader in London is gaffe-prone and fatally wounded, and he also disagrees with you. So he's saying, elect this man who made a really bad call. So how does that work? And also, what would the dynamics be between a Labour First Minister and a Prime Minister that are fundamentally at odds? You know, you said you want to end the politics of grievance, but you've just set up a really, really hostile future relationship there, haven't you?
Well, no, I don't accept that. And let me just first of all say that I made really clear in my statement on Monday that I want Labour ministers, because I'm saying that my first loyalty and my first priority is to Scotland, I want Scottish Labour ministers to stay in government. I was explicit about that on Monday, because they have to be round the table protecting and defending Scotland's interests. Douglas Alexander was appointed Secretary of State by Keir Starmer. He was appointed co-chair of the campaign by me, and I see no issue at all in terms of the role he'll play in that campaign, because every Scottish Labour MP is going to be involved in that campaign to make sure we elect a Scottish Labour government. The other point I'd make is I can understand why Westminster politicians and Westminster journalists will think about what I said on Monday in the context of Westminster. I only care about one place, Scotland. I only care about what it means for Scotland. And I'm very clear, as the person standing in front of the people of Scotland in 3 months' time, asking for their support and asking for their vote to elect me as First Minister, that they deserve to know what my standards are. They deserve to know what I'm willing to accept. They deserve to know what I would do differently and what I would do if I was the First Minister of this great country, as opposed to the chaos that we see from this SNP government. And those dividing lines are getting clearer and clearer by the day. And I apologise, Paul, I've just realised you mentioned one point about opinion polls, actually kind of fits into what Mark was asking. Honestly, if I was judged by the opinion polls, we wouldn't have won the general election. We wouldn't have won the Hamilton Larkhall Stonehouse by-election. I don't accept the gap as the extent you said, but I accepted on the 5th of January that we come into this election as underdogs. But I honestly believe this is an election we can win, and I honestly believe this is an election we will win, because it is getting clearer and clearer by the day that this SNP government has lost its way, that John Swinney is not fit to be First Minister, and the choice is going to be more of the managed decline and dishonesty with him, or a different kind of country with me. And that is a campaign I absolutely relish. And on the final point you made, Mark, around dynamics, let's be really clear that we will always do what's in the best interests of Scotland. And right now we have an SNP government that's first instinct is to think what's in the best interest of the SNP. I'm not going to do what's in the best interest of the Scottish Labour Party. I'm always going to do what's in the best interest of Scotland, because that's the responsibility I see as the person that's a candidate for First Minister, a person that aspires to be First Minister, and if I get the honour of my life to be First Minister, that's how I would govern too, to make sure we work together, break down barriers and deliver for the great people of this country. That's my first priority, that's my first loyalty, and that's why I'm standing to be First Minister. Terry, I apologise, you weren't on my list, so I've spotted you there, and you weren't on my list either, sir, so just remind me of your name.
Tom Wilson from
Tom,
Deadline News.
Tom, I'll take Terry and then I'll take Tom.
Could I just ask you about something that the biggest sort of issues concerning business, which I looked through therefore, is business rates and planning. And you said that you want to tackle both of these issues, but you don't say how. You don't. Do you have a plan for how you're going to reform planning and business rates? Because it's easy to say you're going to do that, but what people want to know is how are you going to do it? What's your plan? So
on each of those things, again, we'll set out much more detail the closer we get to the election, but let's confront both those issues. On planning, I've been really clear that we have far too few planners in our country, and we also have too archaic a system and cluttered system in our country too. So we will have a national planning agency that will be a fast-track system for those projects that are identified as drivers of economic growth in our country. We will use private sector capacity if we have to around the planning capacity to make sure we can get those decisions done much more quickly. We will still maintain local decision making, but we will have that additional capacity across the country, so we don't have the ludicrous situation where the average planning application in Glasgow takes 58 weeks and the average planning application in Manchester takes 18 weeks, because that's pushing investment elsewhere. And on rates, we will fundamentally reform the rate system. I believe that we should have had a pause on the re-evaluations that happen in the here and now, because despite the SNP's rhetoric around what they've done on rate relief, it pales into insignificance when you look at a lot of the reassessments that have happened for many businesses across the country. We should have had a pause on the re-evaluations. We will look to reform the valuation and assessor system the other side of the election. We will reform our our rate system so it's much more driven towards supporting the high street rather than being rigged against the high street in favour of the online giants. We will look at how we can incentivise that, perhaps through looking at turnover models or profit margin models, depending on the individual sectors those businesses are relevant to. But the other thing that I don't want to do is what the SNP far too often have done, which is build a system, impose it, without working with business together on that system. So the process I see for what we'll do with reforms of the rate system is change the assessor system, impose a relief system that actually works, and then agree principles that we then work with businesses on to reform our rate system in the early part of the next Parliament. That's the process we want to take, and they're both really, really important issues that you raised. And last but not least, was it Tom, wasn't it? Tom, from the Eye.
From Deadline News.
Deadline News. Yeah. Fantastic. Hope you've not missed the deadline.
Well, no, either. Hi, Anas. A number of Scottish Labour MPs and MSPs haven't publicly come out in support of either yourself or the Prime Minister since Monday. How concerned are you at this lack of unity in Scottish Labour ahead of the election?
Let me just say to you, we are all 100% unified, 100% hungry, 100% energised and 100% determined to win this election on the 7th of May. We all know we're in the fight of our lives, but it's a fight we believe that we can and that we will win. So let me just be really, really clear about this so no one has any doubt. This is an election that I intend to win. This is an election that Scottish Labour believes it will win. And my first responsibility and my first loyalty is to Scotland. And it's that loyalty to Scotland and that different programme we're going to have that's going to help us win that election on the 7th of May. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, buddy. We're going to just jump again. Hey, it's me. I'm skipping the media library. I'll just write that up.
Really? I didn't see that. The LSE. They can't afford it. Oh, sorry. I thought you meant the London School of Economics, like the London School of Exchange. Yeah, well, that's a bit. I think they're wrong. But there again, why I'm going to say it? Because it's a shit exchange. It's like underperforming. It's not a global relevant exchange. No, it's not being covered. But you do, eh? I know them really well.